Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a seriously dramatic historical event and dive into the profound linguistic beauty found within the 5 short verses of Surat al-Fil. Also known as the chapter of the elephant, this is one of those narratives that just absolutely proves a core truth. No matter how vast human power grows, it is entirely fragile in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, let's dive right into this mystery. We're looking at an event that happened shortly before the prophet's birth, and we are faced with what sounds like a completely impossible scenario. I mean, think about it. Tiny birds going up against massive armored war elephants? How does that even work? Well, to understand how this unbelievable clash happened, we first have to look at the events that set the whole thing in motion.
To really grasp these verses, we need to trace the chronological escalation of a man named Abraha al-Ashram. See, for years, the Arabs held this deep, unwavering veneration for the Kaaba. Now, Abraha, who was a really powerful governor down in Yemen, wanted to divert that massive pilgrimage traffic to his own territory. So, a few months prior to our main event, he goes all out and builds this massive, incredibly extravagant church. He spent vast amounts of wealth on it, fully expecting the Arabs to just flock to his new creation. But they completely ignored it, didn't even give it the time of day. Furious, Abraha makes a firm decision to literally wipe the Kaaba off the map, leading to his massive military march on Mecca.
That brings us to Section 1, the threat to Mecca.
So, Abraha's whole strategy here was pure, unadulterated intimidation. Since the Arabs definitely weren't accustomed to fighting elephants, who in the desert would be, he figured his massive army, which was led by this absolute giant of an elephant named Mahmud, would just easily roll over the Kaaba. Abraha didn't just want a military victory, he was going for total psychological dominance. Bringing a creature as massive as Mahmud into a desert environment was designed to just absolutely terrify the people of Mecca into submission before a single sword was even drawn.
Section 2. The Lord of the House. This brings us to a truly incredible moment of leadership. When the grandfather of the prophet, Abdul Muttalib, walked into Abraha's camp, Abraha naturally assumed he was coming to beg for the Kaaba to be spared. Instead, Abdul Muttalib basically says, "Hey, I just want my stolen camels back." He then delivers this iconic, totally unshakable statement of absolute trust in divine protection. He recognized his own physical limitations. He could only protect his camels. But he had this absolute certainty that the Kaaba's true owner was fully capable of defending it.
I really want you to put yourself in the shoes of the Meccans for a second. You're completely outnumbered, you're entirely unarmed, and you're just waiting to see how the Lord of the House is going to respond. They didn't rally an army, they didn't have heavy weaponry, they literally just watched the horizon. Seriously, ask yourself, how would facing a seemingly invincible army with zero worldly defense change your own reliance on the unseen?
Which leads us to Section 3, the miracle of the birds.
So what happens next is just wild. The very first sign of divine defense was actually the elephant itself. Muhammad stubbornly refused to take a single step toward the Kaaba, but if they pointed him in literally any other direction, he'd happily jog along. He basically staged a one-elephant sit-in. Just like that, Abraha's ultimate weapon of intimidation was rendered completely useless. This massive beast just plopped down on the sand. It was this undeniable sign that a much higher command had completely overridden Abraha's orders.
And this is where the contrast of scale brilliantly comes into play. Allah didn't send a violently massive storm or an army of angels. Instead, he sent small birds and successive flocks, carrying tiny baked clay stones to dismantle the greatest military force of its time. The contrast is staggering, right? On one side, you have the heavy weapons and giant mammals of the ancient world. On the other, Ababil, these successive flocks of little birds, carrying sigil, which are basically just small, petrified clay stones. The divine wisdom here is so profound. Victory wasn't going to come from matching Abraha's physical size. It was going to come from the absolute weakest of creations executing a flawless divine command.
Let's look at Section 4, decoding the 5 verses.
Now, what's really fascinating about this narrative is how precisely the Quran captures it. Let's look at this vocabulary breakdown. Notice the incredible linguistic precision. For example, the invaders are called the companions of the elephant. Why? To focus purely on the event itself, completely ignoring Abraha's fame. The Quran intentionally strips Abraha of his name and his royal title. It reduces his entire terrifying legacy down to the strange animals he brought with him. Every single word chosen, from kaidahum to sigil, carries immense weight and perfectly summarizes the mechanics of the miracle.
Building on that, let's look at the second verse. Notice how Allah specifically targets their kaid, which translates to their malicious, unjust plot. This proves that any plan built upon oppression is ultimately destined for total failure, or tadlil. The Quran doesn't just say, did he not make their army into misguidance? No, it specifically zeroes in on their plot. The sheer physical size of the army wasn't the core issue, it was the corrupt intention behind it all. And that malicious intention was met with complete and utter nullification.
Section 5. The ultimate outcome.
This perfectly sets up the dramatic conclusion. The final verse says, Allah made them like asaf ma'kul, which paints an incredibly vivid, almost visceral picture. It translates to dry crop leaves that have literally been eaten, shredded, and trampled by livestock. Think about that for a second. They went from being the absolute most intimidating military force on the Arabian Peninsula to resembling the worthless, shredded waste left on the ground after livestock have finished their lunch.
Now, why use this specific gross imagery instead of just saying they were destroyed? By doing this, the Quran visually forces the listener to realize that no matter how great human strength becomes, it is so incredibly fragile and ultimately completely worthless when it stands against divine will. It strips the invaders of all dignity. It doesn't memorialize them as fallen warriors in some grand epic battle. It literally memorializes them as waste. It's an unforgettable lesson in humility.
Section 6. Lessons and lasting legacy. So, what we really need to take away from this explainer is that this isn't just some cool historical tale. It's a masterclass in faith. Allah can make the absolute weakest creations defeat the strongest armies, which is a massive reminder for us to never despair when our own worldly resources seem super limited. Ultimately, the end of tyranny is always ruin. And every single creation out there, from a stubborn elephant to a tiny little bird carrying a pebble, is a soldier directed by a higher will. When you realize that the smallest means can yield the greatest results, it completely reshapes how you view the obstacles in your own life.
Let's move to our final point. It is so cool how this builds directly into the very next chapter of the Quran, Surah Quraysh. There's this beautiful symmetry here, where the divine protection established in one surah creates the actual economic safety and provision celebrated in the next. One chapter is all about neutralizing a massive threat, and the chapter immediately following it is about enjoying the bounties of peace. Because the Kaaba was protected from Abraha, the people of Mecca were able to maintain their esteemed status, launch their famous winter and summer trade caravans, and basically live without fear.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to really reflect on today. If unseen forces are constantly protecting you, how is that going to change the way you walk through the world tomorrow? We are so often hyper-focused on the threats we can see right in front of us, but Surat al-Fil is here to remind us to trust the protector we cannot see. Think about the hidden protections playing out in your own life right now, and ask yourself how you can express some true gratitude for them today. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me. Catch you next time.